Good offseason. You're staying, right? There was hesitation.
Adam, it's always a pleasure to be with you.
Well, hi everyone. It's a special edition, an emergency edition. I don't get the chance to say that all that often of the Canes Corner podcast. I am Adam Gold, joined by Cory Lavalette, North State Journal, and The Athletic at Cory Lava on Twitter. That voice you heard, other than mine at the beginning, was Don Waddell. And Cory, I sat down with him for about really what amounted to about 20 minutes after the press conference to introduce the contract extension of Rod Brind'Amour. And we talked about the team and all that. And I had heard through, whether reading it, I think Elliot Friedman wrote about it or he talked about it on 32 Thoughts, was that there were teams that were interested in Don Waddell. It never came up during the press conference for Brind'Amour, I don't believe. So I just asked him at the end as we were going away. I'm like, well, you're going to be here, right? And there was a pause. And I'm like, whoa, that was some major hesitation there. And that was Don's answer, as you heard. And we just laughed and I shut the machine off. And that's where we were. But I kind of knew then that Don Waddell was not long for president and general manager of the Carolina Hurricanes. I talked about it a lot. I'll get to my thoughts, but let me just open with you. What are your thoughts on Don Waddell and the decision to resign? He did not leave for another job. He resigned. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I think I have the worst lighting in all of the internet.
No, I've been much worse than that.
So sorry that it looks like I'm underwater. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I was surprised by the move because I think you've got a couple guys there that are ready for bigger roles. Don's not a spring chicken anymore. So, you have to figure it at some point. You've got to create room for at least one of these other guys that are there if that's the route you're going to go. But yeah, I mean, he leaves at a time that is maybe convenient as far as being a general manager is concerned, because there's a lot of work to be done this offseason, and there's even more work to be done now. And he also leaves at a time where he left the Hurricanes in a good position, and not just his general manager duties, but what he's done as president of the team. And that shouldn't be lost on people is, he ushered through the sale to Tom, before he was even involved in hockey operations. Tom is involved in everything, but, the lease extension and the development agreement around the arena, all of those things, Don is involved in all that. And he deserves a lot of credit for juggling two really difficult jobs and doing a good job at both. And on top of that, he's one of the nicer guys you'll meet in hockey. Just always affable and kind. And I don't know that I've ever seen him really mad, maybe a little mad, but not at me, but I don't know that I've ever seen him really, look like he was throwing stuff off walls or anything. Just a good man who deserves whatever it is he wants. And if he wants to go to the concrete empire that is Columbus, Ohio, if that's where he ends up, then so be it. Right. That was my impression of Columbus when I was there. Is there's a lot of concrete on this campus.
I'm with you on that. I once visited Ohio State University because I was thinking about going there, and this is a long time ago now. This is literally 40 years ago. 20
years back.
Right. But 40 years ago, I visited Columbus, and it had a very much a factory look to it. So I agree on everything you said about Waddell. Class guy, wonderful, good sense of humor, kind man, all of that. I did have one time where he was mad. Actually, with two times that he was mad at me. The first one was I used to do, this is before I did daily podcasts and whatnot. They actually asked me to do the video that appeared on the Jumbotron in between during the second intermission. This is just like, this is what's happened. This is what still can happen, blah, blah, blah. Get hype, fans get into it. And it was a game against Vancouver. And the Hurricanes had just given up like 4 second period goals to fall behind 5-2. And the beginning of that video, and there were like 90-second videos. The beginning of that video was, well, I'm glad that period's over. But then I went into, hey, still in it. Get off to a good start. Get one early. It was a hype video, but he didn't like the beginning, so they pulled it. They didn't run it. Even though I sort of said, this game's not over yet, people. There was that. He was not happy about that. And he actually let me know it later on. And then last year, because there was a lot of work to do in the summer last year, right? Because we knew that the Aho thing was going to happen. There were a fair amount of things that had to happen. And I was walking into an elevator at PNC Arena, or walking out of an elevator as Don was walking in, and he said, "What do you mean Tom has a lot of work to do this offseason?" And I'm like, Don, I said, "Don, I'm just protecting you. I'm just taking the pressure off, Don." So anyway, but it leads me to where I want to be in this conversation, because Don Waddell was very much, in my opinion, like the front man. He was the
Maitre D.
I was going to bring up an analogy that's probably not appropriate for this, but he was basically the front man for really what was going on behind the scenes. And what's going on behind the scenes is that, Don Waddell probably starts the negotiations, but this is very much a Tom Dundon show. And Dundon does the negotiating. He negotiated with Brind'Amour. He didn't remove himself from that situation. I didn't believe that for a second. And when it comes to player contracts, it's still about Tom, which I'm not, this is not a critical comment. That's just, to me, what it is. And because this is a non-traditional front office, which it's very collaborative. There's a lot of people who are giving their input, but ultimately one guy makes the decisions, and he knows enough about hockey to be dangerous, and that's the owner. Maybe Don, on top of the fact that he wasn't getting paid for 2 jobs, maybe Don just wanted something that's a little bit more traditional. Although if he does go to Columbus, I think he'll be more president of that team with a say in hockey ops, as opposed to the general manager who also has to do this other job. And I don't think he get paid enough, or he didn't get paid enough to deal with all the stuff that he had to deal with, and then take the slings and arrows when things didn't work out.
Well, Tom isn't that different from Jerry Jones, except I think, except I think Tom is willing to listen to the people around him who are, and I don't want to say smarter than him, but the people around him who have an expertise in certain areas. There's a reason he's surrounded himself with, scouts and guys like Eric and Darren who have spent a long time doing this stuff. He listens to those guys. It's not like he's out there overruling everything they say. Now, you're right. At the end of the day, for most teams, the guy who signs the check is going to make the decisions. If any GM or president in the league wants to make a big trade, make a big signing, they have to go to their owner. That's not uncommon. The thing that's different is that, Tom will talk to agents. Like, Tom is negotiating with agents, but he's not doing it blindly.
For real.
He's doing it with the input of, maybe what Eric Tulsky is saying as far as, hey, here's what we should envision this guy's value is. And so he doesn't go into it half-cocked and just like, I'll give you $3 million. I'll give you $2 million, maybe like what Jerry Jones actually does, which is...
Well, there was one story. There was one problem, but
but I think that for the most part, it's a collaborative effort that Tom makes the call on, and Tom's got $1 billion. This is $1 billion team. Let's be honest. I mean, that's what an NHL team is worth now anywhere. So if you have $1 billion investment in something, he's got the right to do it. But you're right. I mean, you're right.
No problem. I have zero problem with Tom. Like, I want to make it clear. He has every right to do it. It is his team. And I also think that he has shown a track record of getting more things right than wrong. So, again, this is not a criticism of the owner. But we all agree it's a non-traditional hockey hierarchy here, in that there isn't necessarily the strong. There's no Jim Rutherford here. There's no Steve Yzerman here. There's no Ron Francis here. I apologize for laughing through that. It's just very different. And yes, Eric Tulsky and Darren York are probably the two people you were referring to who have done a very good job. And we're going to get into Tulsky because everybody assumes that it's going to be Tulsky ascending to the throne. My only criticism, it's not even a criticism, it's just a point of fact, is that Don, as the GM, has been the front-facing, picture on all of the moves. Don Waddell likes his team, as though it was Don Waddell's decision to not add at the trade deadline the last 3 seasons prior to this one. It's Tom Dundon's decision. It's always been Tom Dundon. His decision. I don't know why I can't see Tom Dundon today. Could have been the 2 champagne things I had with my wife earlier. And it was not a celebratory thing because Don Waddell has resigned. So I have zero problem with anybody because Tom's track record, again, has been a whole lot more good than bad. Look at the success during the regular season of the team. So I'm not really criticizing. I'm just stating a point of fact.
Columbus would take it 1,000,000 times over, right?
Gosh, yes. And I've spoken to some Columbus, not like legit Columbus fans who would love Don Waddell. So.
Yeah, and I mean, what Don's biggest value, I think, is Don's the traditional hockey man, right? He's spent his whole life in hockey. He knows everyone. Like we both said, he's a good man. So, he's not the type of guy who's out there to swindle other teams and pull one over on other teams and stuff. Now, trades go your way, and relationships can get frayed because of that. But I don't think it's ever been because this team has been like, we're gonna do a real hatchet job on this inexperienced GM or this whatever. So, I mean, there's the value, and it's maybe something that Darren and Eric are going to, whoever is going to be in charge of this. And I mean, like you said, it's Tom, too. Tom's going to be talking to these people, and he's certainly, it's not like he's new on the block. He's owned this team now for 6 years. So, I mean, I think, what you lose with Don is that kind of that soft touch, maybe, of knowing people around the league, knowing people's tendencies, things like that. All that being said, it's not like Eric Tulsky and Tom Dundon and Darren York haven't been looking over his shoulder the whole time, paying attention to that. Right. So,
something you said to me is very important about all of Don's contacts around the league. And by the way, he did rob the Minnesota Wild in the Nino Niederreiter Victor Rask trade. That was one of the best trades in Hurricanes history. That Don Waddell stealth like John Swafford, the ninja, just kind of swooped in, made that deal. Carolina took off after that. Although the first game wasn't good, Nino scored twice, but Carolina lost at home to Ottawa. And that leads me to this question for you, because I talked about it today. I still think Tulsky, York, fine. Dundon's been around 6 years. But Don still knows and has relationships with basically the entire NHL. So isn't there an element that Carolina needs? Not to mention they still need a team president now, right? You got to have, I mean, I'm guessing you do. Maybe they just have to hire a team president if they elevate Tulsky or York. But don't they need somebody who does have some relationships across the league to be a buffer between the league and Tom?
Yeah, I think maybe we're underestimating the amount of involvement that both Eric and Darren have had. It's not like those guys are sitting in their office typing up reports and handing them to Don. If and I've been lucky enough to be at the drafts, and I watch. It's not just Don talking to other teams. It's Eric talking to other teams, and Darren York's running like his chicken with his head cut off at the draft, and
right. That's his deal.
And has done a great job at that. But a lot goes on at the draft beyond drafting players. So and things are going to change with the draft after this year. But at the same time, you get a chance to see how those relationships work. So every GM has to start somewhere, right? Like a guy like Bill Guerin is already going to be the U.S. Olympic GM.
Yeah.
And I mean, he didn't have any of that front-facing experience. Now he was a player, sure. But I mean, if you're a player, if I were to ask Rod Brindamore 8 years ago, hey, how many of these GMs do you know personally? How many does he really know? You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think maybe that part gets overblown. As far as the president's role, I would keep an eye on Mike Foreman, who I think is the head of marketing for the team.
Yeah.
And I think would be a great fit in that role, and is a guy who's done a great job on the marketing side of things.
Oh, yes.
And, maybe has been kind of groomed for this job a bit in the same way that I think, Darren and Eric have been given. And, regardless, let's say one of those two guys ends up being the GM. You would hope that the person who gets left out as the quote GM,
right,
doesn't feel slighted by that, because I think they're going to have the same voice they've always had, right? Like,
right.
Eric Tulsky isn't going to ascend to GM and then all of a sudden have a bigger necessarily clout than he does now. Now there's one less buffer in Don Waddell, but still it's going to be about the collective information this team can pull in, and then filtering it all through Tom, and Tom making a final decision.
All great points. My only question with Mike Foreman is that I can't imagine allowing a Jets fan, not a Winnipeg Jets fan, a New York Jets fan, to be president of anything important. I think that's major.
Wake Forest alum being across the street from NC State. Woo!
And no, but he's also a Duke alum.
Yeah.
He's got both. But he's a New York Jets fan, and that is a character flaw, and that might completely eliminate him.
You know what? Being a Jets fan teaches you how to lose too. So,
well, we don't want that. We don't want any complacency here. All right, so I got some questions. I let people ask some questions. We're going to get to a couple of those in a second, and we're only going to spend another 10 minutes at best here. But what is the impact on the summer business? Because the timing isn't great, right? I mean, the timing of all of this is not awesome. And I want to answer Carolyn's question specifically when I'm done with this little thought here. So what is the impact on the summer business? Because Jarvis, Chatfield, Drury, Martinook, Nason, I mean, there's a lot of players. I mean, I'm not going to name everybody here, but there's a lot of business that has to get done, and has to get done relatively quickly. You got to make a decision on what you're going to do with Martin Necas. Now, maybe that can last a little bit longer because he's restricted, and all of those arbitration cases, and he's arbitration eligible, don't get heard until August. But my guess is you want to have all this stuff done before the draft. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't think the message from the organization changes at all. Whatever line they've drawn in the sand with each of those negotiations, it's not like that's going to change now that Don's gone. And like I said, Tom does a lot of negotiating with these agents himself. So, it's not like that's foreign to the people he's going to be negotiating with. So, I think that I don't know that it changes a whole lot. It might change the face of the everyday call because I don't think Tom is in on every call with every agent. That's a buffer. So, somebody else is going to have to pick up that slack for sure. But I don't know that it changes a whole lot other than it's one less body to do the work. So, I mean, there's that, but hopefully PNC is all booked for the summer as far as I know, like 21 Pilots is coming, right? So,
are they? Good for them.
I think so. I don't know. So, I don't know that it's going to change a whole lot, the philosophy of what the organization wants to do and what it believes. You mentioned Martin Necas. I think, I think there's enough of a schism there that there's probably a break coming between those two sides.
Right.
The question becomes now is what do you do with that asset? There's been rumors about Linus Ullmark. There's been, could you go get draft picks for him? Do you go and you fill several of the holes you have? Much like Winnipeg was able to, Winnipeg was able to do with Los Angeles. They traded, Pierre-Luc Dubois to Los Angeles and plugged a lot of holes with the assets they got back. And I mean, Martin Necas is that type of player. I was in the middle of writing something about him when all this kind of happened. And, his numbers, while you look at them and they're different this year, really, if you take away the power play stuff, his 5-on-5 was pretty much the same. He pretty much the same numbers at 5-on-5 that he had a year ago. And then he didn't play on the top power play unit this year after leading the team in power play points the year before.
I heard his dad say something about that.
Oh, did you? The fact that one of Don's final words as a member of the Hurricanes front office was "tell his dad I said hi" is quite a, isn't that like wasn't that like a Marky Mark skit on SNL? Like say hi to your mother for me or something.
Something like that. That was priceless. Look, I like Necas.
Mm-hmm.
I think Necas really does want to be great. I thought he was a good player in the postseason. I thought there was enough to build on going forward, but not if he isn't also bought into all of it. So, he's one of the players that could get them assets. So whether those assets are futures or currents, it's something that might have to happen. So I'm not, I trust that they'll make the right decision there. But I remember sitting with Dundon 2 years ago when I thought Martin Necas was getting dealt, and he was like, nope. And I thought he was kidding with me, but they didn't. They kept him. They signed him. They got a better version of Necas last year. Then he didn't have a good playoffs. And this year he didn't have as good as a regular season, but I think he had a better, more impactful playoff. He still needed to score more goals, but we can say the same thing about Andrei Svechnikov in that he didn't score enough goals. But I liked him in the postseason, and I liked the line he was on. I thought that was a sneaky, great line for Carolina in 2 rounds with Martinook and Jack Drury. And all 3 of those guys are free agents of one way or another. All right, let me just throw some comments out here. We'll talk about this real quick. Did you have any hints, this is from Carolyn, that made you think this was imminent, what with his contract up this year? Did you think this was imminent going in?
I didn't know that maybe necessarily it was going to happen this summer. But like I said, it felt like something's got to give at some point. You've got Eric Tulsky interviewing in multiple places. I think if Kyle Dubas doesn't shake loose in Toronto, Eric Tulsky is probably the GM of the Penguins right now. That was a great fit for him with the way Fenway thinks about sports. And I mean, the Hurricanes think in a similar fashion. So I think his time is going to come at one point or another. So his value, I think he's very valued with this organization. So at some point, it's almost like you look at what's happened, George McPhee kicking himself upstairs in Vegas, Jim Rutherford kicking himself upstairs. And, you mentioned, it's kind of funny that you mentioned like, oh, there's not a dominant personality like Jim Rutherford. I mean, Jim Rutherford's not even the GM there, and his GM got named GM of the year. And it's like, I don't know if that comes with like puppet strings that Patrick Alvin is attached to or what. It's like the Godfather,
very true.
So, I think there's there's an inkling at some point that something's got to shake loose, and Don has accomplished a lot here. And, maybe he didn't want to deal with a lot of the extra stuff he had to do. Maybe he just wants to be a hockey man, or he wants to be in the business of, helping a team be successful, which he did here. Think about, if we could turn back time and open up Twitter and see all the comments when he was promoted to general manager and the things that people said. And it was, give Tom a lot of credit. Tom made that move. Tom allowed Rod Brindamore to bring Jeff Daniels in, and, everybody balked at, they're just getting the cheapest assistants they could find. And yet they found a way to be successful. And Jeff Daniels gets so much like flack for the power play that he doesn't run.
Somebody wanted him fired because the power play was bad in the postseason for 3 years.
So many times. But you look at guys like Seth Jarvis and Sebastian Aho, and those guys are the players they are today because of how hard Jeff Daniels worked with those guys. Who watched film with them and taught them how to be 200-foot players. And cycling back to Martin Necas, that's the difference right now, is that, Martin's a different kind of player. Rod wants everybody to be the kind of player he was, which was you almost care more about what happens in your end than what happens in the offensive end. And that's not a fault of Martin Necas. It's just he's a different kind of player and is maybe doesn't fit exactly right into what they want to do. So, I think, Don, the time was going to come, I think, where you have to do something. And if this opportunity is what he gets in Columbus, and, there was a previous opportunity in Buffalo, that didn't work out. But, I texted him today and I was just like, first of all, I just wished him good luck, like whatever's next, I told him it was great working with him and talking with him, and we'll see what he does next. I think that no matter what happens next, people are going to forget the Atlanta stuff and they're going to remember everything he did to turn this franchise around. And having a good owner helps for sure. People can debate. People can debate if Tom's a quote good owner.
No, he's a good owner.
There's plenty of people who don't like the way he operates, but listen, your job is to win. And no, they haven't won a Stanley Cup, but they're also not an embarrassment like they maybe were for a decade there.
They're good every year. Yep. You want an example of a bad owner, you look about 130 miles southwest to Charlotte. There's an example of a bad owner in David Tepper. And maybe one day he'll become a good owner. Tom Dundon, as an owner of a franchise, it's really hard to fault him. I do think that Waddell got the job because he was cheap at the time. So two things can be true. I think the assistants were hired because Tom got people who are willing to work for the lowest assistant coaching salaries in the NHL. Rod Brindamore, I think, has done enough to change that, or at least make it equitable. And frankly, Rod was cheap for the first 6 years of his tenure, and now I'm pretty confident is not as cheap. The word sticker shock came up to me, or the phrase sticker shock, when I spoke with Rod on Monday. But yeah, I'm not. Tom is a good owner. Is he the best owner? He's got some work to do in that regard. But I am not in any way complaining about the way he runs the team. So final thing for you, and then we'll close up shop. I like to keep these things around 30, and we're right at that mark right now. And this is from Sam, who is a friend, and I thought I would pass the question along. Top 3 priorities this offseason. And hiring a president doesn't count. So top 3 priorities in this offseason for you, Cory Lavalette.
I think you've got to get Seth Jarvis done. To me, that's,
Okay.
Especially if Martin Necas is moving on. I think Seth has shown that he's ready to become a superstar in this league. And the fact that he did what he did with one arm for 3/4 of the season, or more than
9
that.
fingers in the playoffs.
More than that even, yeah. So, I mean, they've got to get that straightened out. I think you continue to push, and I mean, I don't know how much Don's departure changes things, but I think you continue to push on Alexander Nikishin because that domino changes a lot of things. Like, I fully expect Jacob Slavin to stay here. I think he's put roots in here, and I think the team wants him here, and they see him as a player who will probably age well. And then you look down the line and you say, well, if you're going to pay Jacob Slavin and you're going to bring in Alexander Nikishin, and you already have Dmitry Orlov. Now, even if Nikishin doesn't come this coming year, he's coming the year after.
Right.
Can you invest that kind of money in a Brady Skjei as another left-handed defenseman? So to me, Nikishin is a big piece in all of this. Even if you don't get him signed this summer, I think he has to be a priority as far as setting the table for what's coming in April or May of next year. Because I think he's going to step in and he's going to be a top 4 defenseman in this league right now. So I think that's a priority. We're taking the GM thing off the table too, deciding who your president and GM, right? Beyond that, I think, it's just I think they need to make the most out of whatever happens with Martin Necas. And like I said, I think that relationship is probably over. I mean, I get the feeling that there's I don't think there's bad feelings anywhere. I just think there's an understanding that the whole idea that the two sides have to trust each other, which is what we heard 2 years ago. I don't know that both sides still fully trust each other. I don't know that Martin is totally bought into being the kind of player Rod wants, and I don't think Rod has bent at all on what he expects Martin to be. And when Rod and Don go up at the podium at the end of season press conference and say, "Man, what we really need is a right-handed center," and you've got a guy there who's been salivating to be a center, and I mean, he hasn't proven he should be. I mean, I don't think his faceoffs fell off a cliff this year. Was one of the worst in the league, and while his defensive effort is fine, I don't think it's anywhere near where Rod wants it to be to give him that responsibility. When you hear that stuff, I think a big priority has to be just making sure you do your best. And they're in a good place. I mean, it's not like, Martin has some leverage here, but it's not like he's going to get an offer sheet. That doesn't seem like something that's going to happen.
Seth could.
So yeah, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, that's why you get it done as fast as possible.
Right.
That's why you deal with Seth and Jerry Johansson, same agent as Sebastian Aho. That's why you deal with that as fast as possible. I agree on Seth. The Nikishin thing is interesting. Even if he doesn't come over this year, Hurricanes, should they make the playoffs for a 7th straight season, he can certainly just be added for the playoffs because the KHL season would likely have come to an end by that point. The KHL season is a little bit longer this upcoming year. They've changed the calendar a little bit, but he should be available to come over. But I think guys like Jalen Chatfield, Steph Nason, Jordan Martinook, these guys that help you win, Chatfield can play in a top 4 role next year because he and Orlov are both going to move up because I think both Pesce and Skjei are out the door. So that's, to me, it's a priority of keeping these guys in the fold, especially I still think Chatfield's got more room to go. I think you could see with increased ice time and confidence that there's even more offense from him down the road. Not like run the power play offense, but I think he can play. I think he can play 20 minutes a night and be an offensive contributor to the way Carolina plays. So guys like that are, to me, super important in figuring out, like, what are you going to pay Jack Drury? These guys that are part of the fabric of this team, I think you got to take care of them. Got to make sure and I talked to Don about this as well. And I asked him, would you do big tickets or the smaller tickets first? He goes, whoever calls me first was his answer. But you can make arguments either way, right?
Columbus called him first.
Apparently so. So I think there's a lot of things I'd like to see them do. And they're not going to bring back all these big tickets. I think both. I think there's a chance that Tony DeAngelo could be here, but he's not a big ticket. He would be, a third pair defenseman, power play specialist at best. But I think it's a long shot to bring back Jay Guentzel. And I definitely didn't think they'd bring back Guentzel and Necas. And I think there's a likelihood that more of a likelihood that neither are here than even one. So
I agree.
There's a lot of stuff to do. And I appreciate your time, Cory Lavalette. This was fun on a Friday night of a holiday weekend when I know everybody has more important things to do.
Look how cool we are. We're the cool kids. Friday night on your beautiful deck and me in my dark basement here.
It's mood lighting. It's very nice. You needed a candle.
I know. Yeah, I've got a little lamp. My
little candle would be nice.
My son's got one of those, selfie lights or whatever they call them. I should have gone and grabbed it and
fine.
Illuminated myself. I don't know. Maybe not best to put me in HD, I guess.
Oh, that's unfair. Don't be unfair to yourself on a holiday weekend. Have a good weekend.
You too, buddy.
And I'll talk to you very soon. Cory Lavalette, North State Journal, and The Athletic at Cory Lav. And I appreciate everybody joining us on the Canes Corner podcast. Hey, Cory, before you go, you get a chance to hear the Aluminum Company of North Carolina right there. It's at the bottom of your screen. If you're for everything for the exterior of your home, you can find it at the Aluminum Company of North Carolina. There he is. Cory's pointing to it. Aluminumcompany.com. We'll talk. I'll be back in, I don't know, in a week or so, and we'll dig into the roster even more. Thank you very much to Cory, and thanks to all of you. We'll see you next time on the Canes Corner podcast.